I say, because if I do die, I'm gonna ask the Lord, let me haunt you.
We so often hear about those that don't make it out of danger alive. But what about those that do?
My body got warm and it just said, get up. You're not done, get up.
I'm Caitlin Van Mall, back with a brand new season of I Survived.
The more I begged him, the happier and the more excited he got.
Join me for new episodes of I Survived every Monday, and subscribe now wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 301 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing very well. We just got done with the Super Bowl, done with Valentine's Day. Hope everybody had a good one. And what's up next?
Got spring, and you got the basketball tournament coming up.
Yeah, I guess that's what's coming up.
Hoopville.
Now, what's coming up with you and I right now is a brand new episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and do our Patreon shout outs. First, we had Sherry K.
What's going on, Sherry?
Shalene Daniels.
Hey, Shalene.
Rebecca Schultz.
Appreciate that, Schultz.
Hushpad.
And there's Hushpads.
Nikita Peters.
Hey, Nikita. That's like Elton John said.
Okay. Jenna Stetz.
Hey, Jenna.
Andrew Dodds.
What's up, Dodds?
Ashley Barnes.
Hey, Ashley.
Jeannie Enzi.
Well, hi, Jeannie.
Amber Clark.
Thank you, Amber.
Karen.
Hey, Karen.
Billy Buhner.
Oh, Buna.
Andrea Stewart.
Hey, Stuart.
Artemis.
Hey, good old Artemis.
Hero Fever 99.
If you're going to have a fever, keep it under 100, so 99 is a good one.
Exactly. Anthony Juarez.
Hey, Anthony.
Annie White.
What's up, Annie?
Pamela Solbakken.
Hey, Pamela.
Crystal.
Hey, what's going on, Crystal?
Jonice Eves Roberts.
Look at that. Jonice. I like that.
Yeah, I do too. And last but not least, Mary Clisham.
Hey, Clisham.
And then if we go back into the vault, this week we selected Betty Winter.
I love it. Thanks, Betty.
So we appreciate all the support we get. We also had a great PayPal donation from Deidre Whitaker.
Whitaker in the house.
Yeah, so thank you. Gibbs, right now on True Crime All the Time, we have an episode out on Cynthia Mueller, a wife of a husband who was suffering from ALS.
Yeah.
And, this was a woman who got greedy and wanted to get her hands on his life insurance.
Became a POS.
It absolutely, and remains one.
Yes.
All right, buddy. Are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I'm ready.
We are on to part 2 and the last part of Jack the Ripper. In part 1 of the Jack the Ripper episodes, we covered a timeline of the Autumn of Terror in the infamous Jack the Ripper letters. In part 2, we'll discuss some of the potential suspects, the lives of the victims, and modern updates in the investigation. Now, there's no way that it's possible to cover all of the Jack the Ripper suspects in one episode. So we'll talk about the most well-known suspects and theories about who Jack the Ripper could be. According to The Guardian, over 500 people have been proposed as suspects over the years.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that is a boatload. Now, we're talking about a lot of years, but
Sure.
I don't know. I can't really think of a case where more people have been, thrown out there as suspects. You've got big unsolved cases like Zodiac, DB Cooper, and there are a large number of people in each one of those
Sure.
who people have thrown out, but I don't think either one of them near 500. During the original investigation, the police interviewed over 2,000 people and officially investigated about 300 suspects. One suspect is Queen Victoria's grandson, Prince Albert Victor. Prince Albert Victor was born in 1864. He was the son of Albert Edward and Alexandra, Prince and Princess of Wales. Prince Albert Victor was second in line to the throne, but he died of influenza when he was just 28 years old.
So pulling some royalty into this.
Yeah. Now, before he was connected to Jack the Ripper, there were suggestions that Albert was connected to the Cleveland Street scandal. In 1889, word came out that several prominent Englishmen patronized a male brothel in London. There were rumors that Prince Albert Victor visited the brothel, but his name was kept out of British newspapers and was only mentioned in international publications. This is all according to history.com. This was a guy who struggled in his love life. His proposal to his cousin, Princess Alix of Hesse, was rejected. He then became involved with Princess Helene of Orleans, but he was not allowed to marry her because she was Catholic. He appealed to the Queen and the Pope, but the engagement was not approved. He considered giving up his rights to the throne, but he and Princess Helene ended their relationship. Albert was then engaged to Princess Mary of Teck, but he died before the wedding on January 14th, 1892.
It's a lot of princesses.
Yeah, does seem like there were a lot, I guess.
Yeah.
And maybe still are. I don't know. According to history.com, in 1970, a British physician named Thomas Stoll published an article implying that Prince Albert Victor committed the murders during what he called fits of insanity, which were caused by advanced syphilis.
I've read other stories in the past about how syphilis could make people go crazy.
I've always heard that.
Yeah.
I've always heard that. Now, as you can expect, right? This theory was very sensational. It made headlines all over the world, but it's one of the more unlikely theories because records, newspaper reports, and other historical sources show that Prince Albert was not in Whitechapel when the Jack the Ripper murders took place. So it's kind of hard to commit the murders if you're not there.
Yeah, you got to be there to commit them.
There was a rumor that he impregnated a shop girl named Annie Crook, according to The Guardian. In this conspiracy theory, the royals had the Queen's physician, Dr. William Gull, brutalize her at a mental institution until she forgot everything. Then they left the child with Mary Kelly, who talked to her friends, who were then killed in the murder spree. So, okay, I get that. Conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Mary Kelly starts to blab about something that very prominent people would not want to get out. And so she's killed, but also the people she told her killed.
Yeah, there's a little cleanup action going
Yeah.
on.
But again, Prince Albert Victor was not in London during the murders. Another suspect is the infamous serial killer H.H. Holmes, right? We did an episode on him. It's believed that Holmes killed up to 200 people in the late 1800s. According to history.com, he was most well known for the hotel he constructed in Chicago that was engineered to be a factory of death. And it really was. I mean, go back to that episode.
Oh my gosh, I
there
remember.
Was all kinds of stuff going on. The hotel had a gas chamber, trap doors, a dissection room, and a furnace in the basement to destroy evidence. It's one thing for a serial killer to kind of upgrade a home or outfit a home to help him do what he's going to do.
Right.
It's another thing to entirely design a hotel with the knowledge that you're going to do, all of these really bad things.
For the sole purpose of using it for all these items.
Yeah.
Is that where you get the saying, people check in but never check out, maybe?
Maybe.
Yeah.
H.H. Holmes was eventually arrested and executed in 1896. Some people believe that it wasn't actually Holmes who was executed, and some believe he killed people outside the U.S. Holmes's great-great-grandson, Jeff Mudgett, believes that H.H. Holmes was Jack the Ripper, based on several diary entries where Holmes reportedly wrote about his involvement in the murders.
You know, I've read plenty of online reports that a lot of people think H.H. Holmes was potentially Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, I think we even touched on it when we did the episode.
But as we go through this case and talk about these suspects, you can see how many of them fit that profile.
The one thing that I will say about Holmes is that he had such an elaborate setup in Chicago. He was able to pretty much do what he wanted, you know, for the most part until he was caught. Why, I guess, would he have the need to go to London and do some of that stuff? Or, you know, now if they're saying, okay, it wasn't Holmes that was executed, then obviously he would flee the country and go on to kill over there. Maybe that's part of it. One suspect is a German sailor named Karl Feigenbaum, who was executed for the murder of Juliana Hoffman in 1894. Former detective Trevor Marriott, Bedfordshire Homicide Squad, proposed him as a suspect. Marriott wrote a book about the case in 2007 titled Jack the Ripper, the 21st Century Investigation. According to History.com, Marriott notes that 2 merchant docks were located near Whitechapel, and the men who came through the docks were known to frequent local brothels.
Not too surprising.
I could have probably guessed that without doing any research.
Right.
If you told me there were docks and dock workers and brothels. Now, there were also some similarities between the Jack the Ripper murders and the murder of Juliana Hoffman. Historical research shows that Feigenbaum went by different aliases. He was a merchant seaman for the Norddeutsche Line, and this line owned ships that were docked near Whitechapel during the 5 Jack the Ripper murders. Marriott also found that Feigenbaum's defense attorney actually told newspapers that he admitted to being a serial killer and that he could place his client in Whitechapel during the Jack the Ripper murders. This guy eventually came to the U.S. He was executed in 1896 after he was convicted of killing his landlady, who was Juliana Hoffman. So, I mean, this one's a little strange because, you know, this was a guy who was in Whitechapel, apparently, but made his way to the U.S. and, you know, committed his murder there, was in Sing Sing prison, was eventually executed there. But I guess based on the fact that he was in Whitechapel and there were some similarities in the 2 murders, people believe he could be Jack the Ripper. In 2011, Trevor Marriott claimed that the Metropolitan Police denied him access to uncensored documents about the case. ABC reported that the officers refused to give him the files because they had protected information about informants and that giving him the documents could impede on possible future testimony from modern day informants. All right, I got to think about that for a minute. So you're saying, hey, we don't want to give you this stuff because there were informants back in the 1800s,
right,
who you'd now have information about. And so that would make informants today reticent about coming forward because we gave you 100-year-old information.
Yeah. Kind of call a little bit of BS.
Yeah. I mean, I get what they're saying, but if you give out my information 100 years from now, I'm not going to be around. So why does it matter? But yeah, I get it.
Maybe they're worried about somebody could take revenge on their existing family.
their relatives who are still alive today. Yeah. Who knows? Marriott told the LA Times that he was, quote, hot on the trail of the Jack the Ripper case, but he was held back by the police refusing to release information. According to ABC, at a hearing in late August 2011, an official only identified as Detective Inspector D explained the decision to withhold evidence and said that giving the public access to the records could have a chilling effect on police informants today. He also warned about reprisal attacks Something you just talked about, right? Against the family members of the people who cooperated with investigators in 1888. He said, look at one of the world's best known informants, Judas Iscariot. If someone could draw a bloodline to a present day person, then that person would face a risk. Although I know that seems an extreme example.
Pulling the Bible into it now.
It seems like a pretty extreme example. I don't know, man. I get it. People hold a grudge.
Yeah.
But 100 and some years later, against, however many generations have gone by.
Maybe like that person died and said, son, revenge me. And then that son died and said, son, revenge me. And it just keeps going until one day they find out who they need to take revenge against.
Yeah, I don't know. Marriott said that he needed a little more evidence to confirm his theory that Jack the Ripper was Carl Feigenbaum. I don't know how you say his last name. I'll go with Feigenbaum.
I think it's Feigenbaum.
So, and I think we're going to be talking about this, with a lot of these suspects. People over the years have said, okay, I believe it's so-and-so.
Yeah.
Here's a little bit of evidence. But man, if I just had that, I just need a little bit more.
Right.
I just need a little bit more.
Just something to lock it down.
Yeah. And that's kind of going to be the case with most people.
But if we could lock it down, we wouldn't be talking about an Unsolved, though.
That's true.
So.
That's true. In 2009, British historian Mike Trow announced that he had identified Jack the Ripper using forensics and profiling. He named Robert Mann, who was an attendant at the Whitechapel mortuary where the Jack the Ripper victims were taken for examination. As mentioned previously, experts believe that Jack the Ripper had some anatomical knowledge based on how he mutilated the victims. Some criminologists believe that Jack the Ripper had a difficult life and came from a lower socioeconomic status. Robert Mann grew up in a poorhouse and had a non-traditional job. Additionally, during the inquest into the murder of Mary Ann Nichols, Mann undressed her at the morgue, which in Trow's opinion meant he was admiring his handiwork.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if that's true, or was it just a guy that wanted to see what all the buzz was about? Or was it just the fact that maybe he had something to do with his job working there?
But that's the thing with the Jack the Ripper case, right? It's very easy to throw out a name and say, I've solved it. It's much harder to back it up with the details that prove to people that you've solved it. It'll make headlines. It'll make it its way, around the internet and forums. And, a lot of times these things are shot down very quickly. Same goes with Zodiac. Same goes with DB Cooper and a lot of these other cases. Another suspect, Aaron Kosminski, was a 23-year-old Polish barber who lived in Whitechapel. Kosminski was a Jewish man. He fled Poland because of persecution. He moved to England with his family in 1881. Kosminski was admitted to various asylums throughout his life. He reportedly was hostile towards women, especially sex workers, and was put in an asylum several months after the final murder. According to JackTheRipper.org, London detective Melville McNaughton wrote that Kosminski in his 1894 memoranda, this man became insane. Owing to many years' indulgence in solitary vices, he had a great hatred of women, especially of the prostitute class, and had strong homicidal tendencies. He was removed to a lunatic asylum about March 1889. In 1919, Sir Robert Anderson wrote in his memoirs, "Undiscovered murders are rare in London, and the Jack the Ripper crimes are not in that category. I will merely add that the only person who had ever had a good view of the murderer unhesitatingly identified the suspect the instant he was confronted with him, but he refused to give evidence against him in saying that he was a Polish Jew. I am merely stating a definitively ascertained fact." Anderson didn't name Kosminski. In 1987, Chief Inspector Donald Swanson's copy of the memoir was made public. Swanson was assigned to assess the information in the case, and he was friends with Anderson. He had a copy with annotations made by Swanson. Swanson explained that the witness identified the suspect, but didn't want to give evidence against him because he was also Jewish, and witness would be the means of murderer being hanged, which he did not wish to be left on his mind. Swanson also said that after the identification, the suspect went to his brother's house in Whitechapel and remained under surveillance. He was then taken to a local workhouse and later sent to an asylum where he died. According to jacktheripper.org, Swanson wrote the statement, Kosminski was the suspect. Kosminski started showing symptoms of mental illness by 1890 and was admitted to a workhouse for a few days, then readmitted in 1891. Upon his readmittance, he was certified as insane and was transferred to an asylum. In 1894, he was transferred to the Leavesden Asylum, where he would stay until his death on March 24th, 1919. Kosminski died from gangrene.
It feels like it's not hard to make a case against somebody back then.
No, like I said, you can make a case against anyone. Now, making a good case or, a compelling case, that's right. Different. This Kosminski character, I feel like a little different than some of the others. If it is true, all of this that came out, that a witness to the murderer positively identified Kosminski, then that's a big deal.
Sure.
That's much more than what we've heard about anybody else so far. But you still got to figure out whether all of that is true or not. True Crime All the Time Unsolved is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates, so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy. All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare. So it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. In 2014, author Russell Edwards claimed that he had determined the identity of Jack the Ripper based on DNA obtained from Catherine Eddowes Shaw. He claimed that the evidence pointed to Aaron Kosminski. Catherine Shaw was picked up by Sergeant Amos Simpson. He wanted to give it to his wife, but she was horrified and didn't wear it.
Yeah, I don't think I would want to wear something like that either.
Hey, honey, I got this shawl for you. It came from one of the Jack the Ripper victims. What woman in her right mind would say, oh, that's great. I'll wear that around town. And the word horrified was used. And yeah, I think most people would be horrified.
Yeah, but as you say that, I'm thinking, you know what? There's probably a couple today, true crime fans, that'd be like, oh, I'd wear it.
Well, yes, but that would be for a different reason. I'm assuming in the 1890s, this woman was not a true crime fanatic.
Well, that's true.
So this was more of a, hey, I got this for you type of deal. And she was like, probably once she figured out where it came from, like, no.
Yeah, what's wrong with you? Yeah.
Thanks, but no thanks. No, there are plenty of, true crime aficionados who like memorabilia or I don't know if like's the right word, but, would want something connected with an infamous case. Let's put it that way. So this shawl was put away and passed down for over 100 years. Apparently it was never washed.
You know, though, if it was, you wouldn't want to be that one person that said, you know, hey, Mike, for 78 years, no one's washed this. And you just took it home the night before, and like your wife's like, hey, I washed that shawl for you. You'd be like, yeah, we didn't wash it either.
No, and we definitely didn't wash it either. I don't know how you wash it, but we didn't wash it. So it was never washed, apparently. In March 2019, the Journal of Forensic Sciences published the results of tests completed by 2 biochemists on the shawl, which also named Kosminski as the match. But geneticists have disputed their findings. Forensic scientists tested the stained silk shawl found next to Catherine Eddowes. The shawl is speckled with blood and semen. According to science.org, the semen is believed to belong to the killer.
So it sounds like they're really putting some science behind this shawl.
Yeah, they're trying to use 21st century, scientific methods on a 19th century item from a case. So the first tests on the shawl were conducted by Jari Luhalainen, a biochemist at Liverpool John Moores University. He said he wanted to wait for the fuss to die down before he submitted his results. Russell Edwards purchased the shawl back in 2007, and he was the one that gave it to Jari. Edwards used this guy's unpublished results to name Kosminski as the killer in his 2014 book, Naming Jack the Ripper. But I mentioned that there were some disputes by geneticists. Geneticists complained that it was impossible to assess these claims because there were few technical details published about the genetic analysis. According to science.org, in 2019, Luhalainen and his colleague David Miller described how they extracted and amplified the DNA on the shawl in what they called the most systematic and most advanced genetic analysis to date regarding the Jack the Ripper murders. I would assume it probably was, since I'm not sure how much genetic analysis had occurred
up to that point.
Up to that point, if you're in 2019, it's definitely going to be the most systematic and advanced.
And you're the one that has the shawl.
They compared fragments of mitochondrial DNA taken from the shawl to samples taken from living descendants of Catherine Eddowes and Aaron Kosminski. The Journal of Forensic Sciences concluded that the DNA matches a living relative of Kosminski. Their analysis also suggests that the killer had brown hair and brown eyes, which matches evidence from an eyewitness. So, I mean, you hear all this and you think, wow, this is pretty compelling.
Yeah.
This is technical DNA type stuff.
Case closed.
Case closed. According to science.org, the scientists did not publish key details on the specific genetic variants identified and compared between DNA samples. They did represent the genetic variants with a graphic of colored boxes and used overlapping boxes to show where the shawl and modern DNA sequences matched. Miller and Luhalainen said that the Data Protection Act prevented them from publishing the genetic sequences of the living relatives, and the graphic is easier for non-scientists to understand. But a number of experts criticized the use of mitochondrial DNA analysis. One expert said that mitochondrial DNA poses no privacy risk, and the authors should have included the sequences in the paper. Another expert said that mitochondrial DNA can only show that two DNA samples are not related. Others say there's no evidence that the shawl was even at the crime scene. And obviously, it could have become contaminated at any point in time.
Over the 100+ years.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think anytime you can throw some science into it, you might steer some people to believe your theory.
Yeah, well, just look at, the number of cases that we've done when you throw all of this jargon and numbers and analysis at a jury, I think a lot of times it seems very, very compelling. And this could too. The problem with it is you have other professionals doubting it and saying, well, we don't really know how they did what they did because they didn't publish it or they didn't, put it all in there. So,
which is a problem, right? You, as a scientist, you want to see how it was determined.
Yeah, but if it is accurate, then I think it could be pretty damning evidence.
Oh, for sure.
That maybe this guy really was involved. In 1992, a scrap metal merchant named Michael Barrett came forward with a journal that he claimed his friend Tony Devereaux gave him the previous year. The writer doesn't identify himself by name, but based on the contents of the diary, the former owner was Liverpool cotton merchant James Maybrick. Maybrick died in 1889. His wife Florence was arrested and charged with murdering her husband by arsenic poisoning. According to jacktheripper.org, the writer claims that he saw his wife with an unknown lover in Whitechapel. He was so enraged that he went on a murderous rampage in Whitechapel and murdered 5 sex workers. The writer described the murderers and ended with, "I give my name that all know of me, so history do tell what love can do to a gentle man born. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." And apparently before 1992, there were no suggestions that James Maybrick was Jack the Ripper. He wasn't even on the radar.
Yeah.
The only evidence against him is this diary
that popped up.
Yeah. So again, I think you have to question the veracity of all of this.
Sure.
And here's why I say that. Let's say you, Mike Gibson, solved the Jack the Ripper case.
Oh, huge.
Definitively solved it. We're able to prove it.
Yeah.
Would that not be like the biggest thing?
It'd be huge.
You'd be on all the talk shows.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a fame quotient. There's definitely a money angle to putting some of this stuff out there.
Wouldn't you want to read my book on how I solved it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's why so many people put things forward, and one of them could be true, but I think you have to at least look at all of it with that in mind. There was a lot of debate among ripperologists about the authenticity of the diary. Michael Barrett told the Liverpool Post that he forged the diary, but then he later withdrew his confession. Barrett's ex-wife then said that the diary had been in her family's possession since World War II.
Once you say openly that you forged it, it's very hard to backpedal from that.
Well, your credibility is shot, even if you come back later and say, I didn't really mean that, right? Your credibility takes a huge hit.
Sure.
Experts found that the details written in the diary come from press reports of the murders. And when referencing the Mary Kelly murder, the author describes how he dispersed her body parts in a room and cut off her breasts. But this was not actually what police found at the crime scene. Mary Kelly's breasts were removed, but they were found under her body, not put on a bedside table like the author wrote. In 1992, a security officer from Liverpool named Albert Johnson bought an antique watch. The victim's initials were carved inside the watch with the signature J. Maybrick and the message, I am Jack. The carvings have been found to be compatible with the time period 1888 to 1889, but these findings are disputed.
I mean, maybe his name was Jack. I am Jack.
Or somebody got an old watch and found a way to, make these carvings that would make it appear as though they were done way back when, right?
Yeah, I think it goes to what you said. If they can find a way to get fame out of this, they'll do about anything.
Which then leads to money, which then may lead to something else. According to The Guardian, Walter Sickert is one of the most famous Jack the Ripper suspects. He was an impressionist painter who was born in Germany in 1860, but raised in England. Sickert had been linked to the murders as an accomplice to the alleged conspiracy to cover up for Prince Albert Victor.
So we're back to the royals again.
Yeah, strange how it comes back around. A man named Joseph Sickert, claiming to be the son of Walter Sickert, said that his father confessed to his involvement before he died in 1942. There's only one problem. Walter Sickert never had any children that we officially know of. I mean, it's just there's no record of any children. According to The Guardian, Walter Sickert appears to have written a series of letters to the police in 1888 claiming to be Jack the Ripper. The letters included drawings of men with knives standing over dead women. In the early 1900s, Sickert created paintings of naked sex workers posed behind their clients. One painting shows a man with his hands around a woman's neck. He was also fascinated by the Jack the Ripper case. He rented a room that his landlady believed Jack the Ripper once stayed in. This inspired him to paint Jack the Ripper's bedroom around 1907. According to History.com, American crime novelist Patricia Cornwell became a leading proponent of the Sickert theory with her 2002 book, Portrait of a Killer, Jack the Ripper, Case Closed. Sickert's paintings of the Camden Town murder of 1907 led Patricia Cornwell to argue he was Jack the Ripper. The painting shows a man standing over a woman on a bed. The Guardian wrote, "She is not so much a continuous figure as a collection of ruddy, moist forms like meat in a butcher's window. The male onlooker could be a killer contemplating his handiwork." All right, that's vivid.
Very vivid. I saw some of those paintings online when we were doing the research and pretty detailed.
Cornwell has written about how she and a team of experts used modern investigation skills and forensic techniques to establish what she calls Sickert's undeniable guilt. Apparently, she spent $6 million on her research to buy drawings, paintings, and letters, and for DNA testing. The team analyzed Sickert's paintings and compared his DNA to samples found on some of the letters allegedly sent by Jack the Ripper. She compared DNA from letters, envelopes, and stamps from the Jack the Ripper letters to DNA samples from Sickert, his first wife, and others.
Well, that's a lot of money to spend unless you felt really, really good about the research you had.
Well, obviously, that's a boatload of money. I mean, I think she has a lot of money, but that's still a lot of money to spend on a hunch, right? So she, to your point, definitely had a belief that she was on the right track. Now, she didn't find any concrete proof, but used her book to profile Sickert. According to CBS.com, she wrote in her book, "At best, we have a cautious indicator that Sickert and Ripper mitochondrial DNA sequences may have come from the same person." Okay, I said no concrete proof. That's definitely not concrete proof.
Right.
Cautious indicator, may have come. Those types of statements are not definitive in any way. The Guardian reported that Cornwell believes that a defect in Sickert's penis and his failure to have children, despite 3 marriages and affairs, made him a serial killer. She said that in one of his paintings, which shows a woman in a pearl necklace, the pose is identical to how Mary Jane Kelly was found. Another painting shows a mutilated woman's face that looks similar to Catherine Eddowes. Cornwell did not find any DNA on the letters to compare with the samples taken from Sickert's canvases and desk, but she did claim that one Jack the Ripper letter had the same watermark as Sickert's writing paper, and added, if a jury then had seen that, they would have said hang him. Cornwell worked with Paul Ferreira, director of the Virginia Institute of Forensic Science and Medicine. Ferreira used an image enhancement computer to compare the watermarks. Cornwell's research indicates that Sickert was either in London or on holiday in northwestern France, which was close enough to travel back and forth. 5 of the letters were signed Nemo, which is Latin for nobody. Sickert's stage name as a young actor was Mr. Nemo. Many Jack the Ripper experts dismiss this theory, arguing that most of the letters are hoaxes and that Sickert was most likely in France during the murders. According to The Guardian, in 2002, the Conservation Department at Tate Britain, an art museum in England, had paper analyst Peter Bauer compare Sickert's correspondence with some of the Jack the Ripper letters. Bauer's research has conclusively shown that the paper of 3 letters written by Sickert in 1890 matches 2 Jack the Ripper letters of October 1888.
So basically they use similar paper, the same paper, but it doesn't mean he wrote those letters.
Well, I don't know how many different types of paper you could get in 1890. And if you were living in London, shopping in London, could you have purchased the same type of paper? I think obviously the answer is yes.
Yeah.
So I just, and we'll say this about everything. I don't know what it proves.
Interesting facts.
Sure. It's all worth noting. It's worth talking about. Tate assistant curator Thomas Kennedy pointed out to The Guardian in 2022, Sickert's interest in Jack the Ripper was one shared by most Victorians. Kennedy said, Sickert was almost playing up to it. He was very interested in Jack the Ripper, but so was everyone else. And that's kind of where my mind was going as we were talking about Sickert. Okay, he's making these paintings.
Yeah.
Is it because he was a killer, or is it because he was fascinated with Jack the Ripper?
Yeah, I think he was just fascinated with Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, I mean, wanting to stay in the same hotel room that somebody thought Jack the Ripper stayed in. Things like that kind of make you think that that's kind of where he was. And, his letters were written a couple of years after.
Sure.
Is it possible that he could have found out what type of paper? Could he have bought the same paper? I don't know.
And when they say that some of his paintings reflect certain details of the crime, well, he read about the crimes. And he's an artist, so obviously he can portray those in his paintings.
Well, yeah. I mean, if a woman is posed in a certain way, is it based on his life experience as a killer, or is it based on what he read in the paper?
Right.
Did he see a picture of one of the victims, and a woman in his painting looks very similar, as was noted? But can we go back to the defect in the man's penis?
Yes.
Okay. I just thought that was, I don't know, a strange term. I get it. Unable to have children. Yeah. A defect in his penis made him a serial killer. I don't know. Everybody's got a theory.
I'm thinking maybe there might be a lot of serial killers out there.
Yeah. I mean, it hasn't turned you into one, but hey, I mean, everybody's got a theory. So we said right up front, Gibbs, there's no way we can talk about all the suspects that people have, proposed over the years. We talked about some. I'm sure people will say, why didn't you talk about this person or that person? You just can't squeeze everybody in.
Right.
I do want to talk about one final theory, and it's that Jack the Ripper was a woman. A witness claimed that she saw the 5th victim, Mary Kelly, several hours after she was killed. The lead investigator suggested that it wasn't Mary, but a female killer escaping, wearing her clothes. Famous author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle speculated that a woman could carry around bloody clothing without suspicion if she pretended to be a midwife. The only female suspect ever considered by detectives was a woman named Mary Piercy. In 1890, Mary murdered her lover's wife and daughter, and she was executed on December 23rd, 1890. She was first named as a suspect by author William Stewart in 1939. In 2006, Australian scientist Ian Finley traveled to London to collect saliva from a collection of Jack the Ripper letters believed to be the most credible, Scotland Yard kept the evidence until 1961, but now it's stored at the National Archive. The evidence includes letters sent from Jack the Ripper. Finley swabbed the back of stamps, gum used to seal envelopes, and possible bloodstains. He concentrated on the swabs from the Openshaw letter, which is believed to be a genuine letter. Ian Finley told the Australian Broadcasting Corporation that he developed a profiling technique to extract DNA from one cell or strand of hair up to 160 years old. According to The Independent, Finley's results were inconclusive and not forensically reliable, but was able to extract DNA to create a partial profile and concluded that it's possible the killer could be female.
Possible, right? Inconclusive, possible.
Yeah.
It's like saying maybe.
Well, one thing we haven't talked about is you have a number of people trying to do research, some people trying to do genetic testing on evidence that is like 100 years old.
Very
plus.
difficult.
And so, obviously that, like you said, that is very difficult. The other thing that strikes me is that it's almost always in connection with a book.
Yes, of course.
And so, is that a coincidence? And I would say no, because you want to sell books.
Of course you do. You got to make a living.
But this idea that Jack the Ripper could be female, it's definitely an interesting idea. Retired lawyer John Morris implicated a woman named Lizzie Williams in his 2012 book, Jack the Ripper, The Hand of a Woman. Lizzie Williams was married to physician Sir John Williams, who was also named as a suspect in the 2005 book Uncle Jack, co-written by his descendant, Tony Williams. Sir John was an obstetrician to members of the British royal family. Like you said, it keeps coming back to the royals.
It kind of does.
For some reason. The book claims that Sir John knew his victims and killed them to research the causes of infertility. Experts later showed that the research for the book had flaws. And I think you find that a lot. There are a lot of books about Jack the Ripper, a lot naming the killer, and probably more people pointing out why the books don't make sense.
Exactly, yeah.
Or making that argument. John Morris writes that Lizzie killed the victims because she was angry, that she was experiencing infertility, which led her to remove the wombs from 3 of the victims. Morris notes that none of the women were sexually assaulted and that Annie Chapman's personal belongings were placed at her feet in what he called a feminine manner. 3 small buttons in a woman's boot were found in blood near another victim. Remnants of a woman's cape, skirt, and hat were found in Mary Kelly's fireplace ashes. These items didn't belong to the victim. Morris presents evidence that Mary Kelly was having an affair with Sir John, who ran abortion clinics in Whitechapel. Morris found documentary evidence suggesting that Lizzie had a nervous breakdown after the killing spree. He told the Daily Telegraph, "The case for a woman murderer is overwhelming, but unfortunately, it doesn't sit well in some quarters where such a theory flies in the face of long-held beliefs, because everyone believes that the murderer was a man. All the evidence that points to a woman has been ignored. Lizzie died in 1912 and was never questioned by the police." In 2019, social historian Hallie Rubenhold published The Five, a book about the victims of Jack the Ripper. She spoke with The Guardian and said, "For too long, there has been this idea that these women were all the same, a nameless, faceless mass of grubby, disgusting people, indistinguishable from one another. And they aren't. They only ended up in the same place." Rubenhold said that while researching coroner's inquests, historic records, and newspaper reports, she found no evidence that Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, and Catherine Eddowes were sex workers. Polly and Catherine were domestic servants or worked in laundries, and Annie was financially supported by her husband. Maya Crockett wrote for stylists that Polly Nichols was the daughter of a blacksmith and grew up in Gunpowder Alley. Daisy Goodwin wrote for the Times that in 1876, Polly, her husband, and 3 children moved into tenements built for the deserving poor. Within a few years, Polly left home for the workhouse because of her husband's infidelity. The workhouses were institutions where the poor worked in exchange for food and shelter. They were usually poorly managed and people lived in horrible conditions. After she worked as a maid, Polly ended up on the streets and was soon killed. Francis Wilson of The Guardian wrote that investigators tried to blame the murder on Polly's transient lifestyle. According to the Smithsonian Magazine, during the inquest into Polly's death, the coroner asked her former roommate, "Do you consider that she was very cleanly in her habits?" And it was argued that this question was indirectly asking if she was a sex worker.
Yeah, it sounds like the assumption was always that most likely they were sex workers.
All of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think throughout the years, people have dispelled or tried to dispel the notion that all of them were. Annie Chapman may have lived a normal middle-class life, but she suffered from alcoholism. The Guardian wrote that Annie was the wife of a coachman. She had 8 children. 6 of them had health issues due to Annie's alcohol addiction. Helena Horton reported for the Telegraph that Annie went to a rehab center for treatment, but was unable to make a full recovery. Her alcoholism took a toll on her marriage, and by the end of her life, she was on the streets. Elizabeth Stride was a sex worker, but she mostly did work as a maid in Gothenburg and Hyde Park, and actually opened a coffee shop in East London. Stride also posed as a shipping disaster victim to defraud the wealthy once she came to England. Maya Crockett wrote that Stride may have been experiencing mental health problems linked with syphilis.
Seemed like this syphilis caused a lot of problems.
Yeah, I think it did. Francis Wilson wrote for The Guardian that Catherine Eddowes had a more advantageous background because she attended primary school and knew how to read and write. She and her common law partner, Thomas Conway, traveled around England selling chapbooks or poetry pamphlets. Conway became abusive towards Catherine, and the two ended their relationship. It was said that she was very popular, and about 500 people came to her funeral.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, I think what you're seeing here in writing from various outlets at various times is these women were different. Obviously, some were sex workers, some were thought to not have been. Some maybe had a little bit of a shady past. Elizabeth Stride defrauded some people. I mean, you're not going to have glowing things said about everyone.
No.
According to The Guardian, Mary Jane Kelly, who was a sex worker, showed hints of an education and targeted well-to-do clients in the West End while living in Knightsbridge. Mary Jane Kelly was actually the only woman who was labeled with the word prostitute on her death certificate. Hallie Rubenhold's research led her to believe that Mary Jane was almost trafficked in Paris, but she escaped and returned to London. She moved around in brothels and boarding houses. Rubenhold theorizes that based on the positions of the bodies, excluding Mary Jane, the victims were killed while sleeping outdoors. Rubenhold said, "The more I looked for evidence of sex work, the more I found that it just simply wasn't there. What I found instead was a lot of convoluted, confused definition of what prostitution was among the working classes and the poor. It is all bound up with sexual practices, partnerships, sex outside of marriage, how people lived with each other, all totally at odds with what we call Victorian morality." So, what I'm taking from this was that the word prostitution or the label was given to many women who were not engaged in sex work at all. That's what I'm taking from what she's saying based on her research. Apparently, Victorian morals were determined by the upper class, not the working class, who made up the majority of the population. According to The Guardian, a year before the murder spree, the London police were ordered to stop accusing women who were seen alone at night of being sex workers because one woman was falsely charged when she was out buying gloves.
Yeah, just the fact that you're out in the evening
By yourself.
By yourself doesn't mean that you're a sex worker. But clearly that's what they were accusing the women of.
The London police.
Yes.
After Annie Chapman was murdered, Edward Fairfield of the Colonial Office wrote to the Times, "The horror and excitement caused by the murder of the 4 Whitechapel outcasts imply a universal belief that they had a right to life. If they had, then they had the further right to higher shelter from the bitterness of the English night. If they had no such right, then it was, on the whole, a good thing that they fell in with the unknown surgical genius." Okay, let's dissect that for a minute.
I'm kind of like, wow.
Yeah, unknown surgical genius? Now, part of what he said made a lot of sense, right? They had a right to life.
Right.
They did. They further had the right to higher shelter from the bitterness of the English night. Meaning, at least the way I'm taking it, is that they shouldn't have been forced to sleep outside.
Right.
But then he said, if they had no such right, it's a good thing that they basically were killed by this surgical genius. Okay. A little bit at odds with what this guy's writing. Some good, some bad.
Is he trying to say that they were spared from being in the bitterness of the night?
Yeah, I think you could read it that way. Yeah. I don't agree with that part, but I think you can read it that way.
Yeah.
According to The Guardian, Rubenhold said the media really pushed the idea that these women were asking for it. These were bad women out at night. They were dispossessed. They were no longer the angel in the house or a part of marriages and families. Therefore, they needed to be punished. And I think this goes back to some of the stuff we talked about in part 1, which is, how I believe society looked at these women. Obviously, they looked down on them. And, Rubenhold kind of does a good job, I think, of painting the picture of the way that society kind of viewed these women, right? They're bad. They're out at night.
Yeah.
They're not part of families.
That's Victorian society back in the late 1800s.
Yeah. And they need to be punished, is what she said. Her book, The Five, is an important modern resource to learn more about the lives of the victims, including their childhoods, marriages, children, and how they ended up in Whitechapel. So I think anybody who's interested in that, because obviously we don't have time to go through all of it,
Right.
but this book, The Five, is pretty compelling. In late December 2022, the only known facial composite of Jack the Ripper was revealed to the public. The police made the discovery while looking through old archives. Among many artifacts they found a face carved into the handle of a wooden walking stick owned by an officer who worked the Jack the Ripper case. The face on the cane is the only known composite of Jack the Ripper. Scotland Yard detective Frederick Aberline was taken off the case in 1889 after he failed to capture the killer. He was given the cane after he was taken off the case. He retired in 1892 after 30 years and died in 1929.
Yeah, you can see this cane on the internet, obviously. Very, I want to say kind of spooky when you look at it.
Well, we talked about a lot of composites, drawings, clay models,
Yeah.
3D images, or computer generated images. I've never heard of a composite being, what would you call it, carved
Yeah,
into wood.
a very detailed carving.
But you could do it
Sure.
if you were skilled enough.
Yeah.
The cane was stored at the police college in Bramshill, Hampshire. The college was shut down in 2015. But the cane was recovered when staff were looking through memorabilia at the College of Policing's headquarters in Brighton. A spokesperson said 2 staff found it when looking through artifacts in storage after Bramshill closed down.
Yeah, I would think that would be something that would be in a national museum or something like that.
Yeah, I'm always amazed that, kind of these really historic pieces, and you'd have to call this cane a historic piece if it really is indeed the only composite of the man thought to be Jack the Ripper. And you're right. You think it would be in some thick glass case.
Yeah, some national museum there.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not. It's just, in a box, maybe somewhere in a room filled with junk.
Luckily, someone saw it and didn't pitch it out.
Yeah, and imagine if you're that person. You're rummaging through things, and all of a sudden you find this and ultimately figure out what it is. Wow. I mean, what a find.
Yeah.
So I think, as we wrap up this case, the Jack the Ripper murders, obviously one of the most famous unsolved cases of all time. And although experts have spent over a century trying to identify the killer, and many people are still actively trying, I think a lot of people doubt that this case will ever be solved. Probably a lot of that has to do with the age of it. But there's no doubt that a lot of people find this case fascinating. To analyze the crimes, the potential suspects, and look at the victims of Jack the Ripper. Now, unfortunately, it's the victims who are often overlooked and forgotten.
Absolutely.
About when discussing the case. We tried to go into some detail.
Yeah.
We can't go into the type of detail that the book did, The Five, but modern historians are taking steps to uncover more information about their lives. And I think a big part about this case is that people are, at least today, trying to discuss the murders in more respectful ways. This was a hard case to do because when you go back through the research, and we said it in episode 1, there were a lot of words and phrases that, obviously we would never use today. And so some of that stuff we cleaned up and changed the wording so that it's not offensive. But when you read some of that stuff, it's really offensive.
It's almost like the articles were more offensive to the victim.
Absolutely.
Than the killer.
Absolutely. And so what does that do? Back to me talking about how society viewed these women.
Yeah.
Well, when they're reading the paper and the paper is calling them, these names and all of this stuff, I think it only kind of furthers that, and the one lady said in her book, it was almost as if the public thought that these women got what they deserved because they were all sex workers. They were all out at night. They shouldn't have been out at night. They should have been home with their families.
Right.
So tough case because number one, it's nasty. It's gruesome when you analyze the details of the murders, but then, this century plus long hunt to solve the mystery of just exactly who was Jack the Ripper. I think a lot of people have tried to profit by putting people's names forward with some information to back it up. Obviously, some people have gone further with it than others.
Sure.
I think there's a lot of people who have just thrown names out and they're ripped apart by the Ripperologists because they really have no basis in fact for the name that they're throwing out.
I think when you think about just the few suspects we talked about and how bad those individuals were on their own, and knowing that there were even other suspects that were very bad individuals too.
Oh, sure.
That we didn't talk about, kind of sets up what that climate must have been like back then.
Yeah, I have no idea who Jack the Ripper was. I'm not even going to speculate or say I'm leaning this way or that way. The one thing I will say is this Kosminski guy.
Yeah.
He really intrigues me because there is some DNA involved. Now,
Right.
there's a lot of doubt about how good the DNA work is or how it was done. So I don't know. But if there really is some linkage by DNA, then obviously that would mean something.
Sure would. Yeah.
Much more so than saying, well, he was in Whitechapel and, his tallywhacker didn't work. And so obviously it must be him. Okay. I'm going to need a little bit more than that.
I go a little deeper than that.
Than a bum tallywhacker.
Yeah.
You're going to have to give me a little more evidence than that. But
At least DNA is a little bit more compelling.
yeah. Yeah. But somebody's going to have to prove that the work done is correct.
Yes.
And I got the sense that a lot of people just are unsure about it.
But I also
at this
think
point.
in this case, you are always going to go head to head with a lot of skeptical individuals.
Well, and back to, I think, a point that we made, which is once people lock on to their suspect,
Yeah.
it's very tough to get them to veer away from that person.
Yeah, for sure.
And, I don't even know if DNA is going to do it because we don't know how viable this 100-plus-year-old DNA is that they're comparing it to. And I think that's why a lot of people are skeptical about that. But there was some other stuff about Kosminski that was interesting. I have no idea if he's considered by many to be a leading suspect. The Walter Sickert guy.
Sure.
I didn't really find him that compelling, to be honest with you.
I think he was more fascinated.
Well, I think well known. His name's out there.
Sure.
But, the drawings and the wanting to stay in the hotel room, none of that really moves the needle with me. But I think that's why this case is unsolved after 100+ years. But that's it for our episodes on Jack the Ripper. We got some voicemails, Gibbs. You want to check those out?
Yeah, let's hear them.
Hi, Mike and Gibby. This is Melissa Lochner from Grand Prairie again. I just heard my voicemail, and it was an Easter egg. Just got done listening to the Phillip Island murder. So I'm almost done with True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So after this, I'm going to binge criminology. So I still love what you guys do. You guys are the only podcast I listen to. I listen to on that work while I'm crafting, whatever it is I'm doing. So we love you guys. Keep it up. Keep your head on a swivel and keep your own time ticking. Bye.
All right. Awesome. So, over the years, we've received voicemails from a lot of people who said, well, I'm at episode 89.
Right.
And we've always kind of joked around, well, they'll hear it eventually.
Yeah.
I think this is the first person who's actually called back later on to say, hey, I heard my voicemail.
Finally got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that she's doing some craft. I do crafting.
I know you do.
I do that pottery wheel. I sit there and I do that, trying to make something, and I feel like there's always like a ghost in the room with me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. It always ends up looking like Patrick Swayze. And,
How'd you know that? Yeah, it does.
And I know you do some decoupage. I've heard you say the word. I don't know what it means, but I know you're big into decoupage, something like that.
Hey, Mike and Gibby. This is Jennifer from Texas. I think I'm kind of crazy, but I think the only people that would understand would be you guys. So we have these homeless people that kind of stay at the corner of the exit, and I have a sticker on my car that's pretty noticeable, and I live close-ish to the freeway. And every time I want to give out to these people, I get so scared that they're going to notice my car and then track me down and, break into my house and kill me. And, Patch Adams just really, I think, ruined my childhood and ruined me for giving to people close to my house. I will totally give to somebody if I don't know who you are. But if you're a regular, I'm very cautious. Do you guys kind of get where I'm coming from, or am I just super crazy and paranoid? Anyways, love you guys, love your podcast. I can't get enough of you guys. You make it so easy to listen, and I really appreciate everything you guys do. Stay safe and keep your own time ticking, and I'm Team Mike.
So I found that to be a very interesting voicemail because it brings up a really good question. It's great to give out to people and to be helpful and all of that. But in doing so, could you potentially put yourself, in harm's way? This notable sticker, I don't know exactly what it is, but from the sounds of it, it's pretty distinctive.
Yeah.
It's not my kid beat up your honor student or whatever. You see that bumper sticker.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
All the time. So this is a very distinctive sticker that if somebody was passing by and let's say the car was in the driveway, they would realize that this is a person who was handing out money. And so I don't know. I don't think it's being paranoid. I think these are important things to think about. What I don't think we should let it do is stop us from, living our lives the way that we want to live them.
Yeah.
But I think all these types of things are good to be aware of. I will say that.
I think you're going to have to get off the next exit and then
double back. Okay. So that's what you're saying. Yeah. I don't know. I found it to be an interesting question because I think about things like
Sure. Yeah. Keep your head on a swivel.
Probably more so than most.
Yeah.
But I try not to let it invade all of my thoughts so that I would not do something that I want to do.
Because then it incapacitates you.
Yeah. I don't let it do that, but I do think about things.
Sure.
All right, buddy. That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.
All month long on Pluto TV, stream the biggest Tyler Perry movies free. Watch your favorites like Medea's Witness Protection and Medea's Big Happy Family. Join Tyler Perry as he goes on a couples retreat with Sharon Leal in Why Did I Get Married? Or Idris Elba and Gabrielle Union in the Tyler Perry directed film Daddy's Little Girls. Plus, Pluto TV has hundreds of channels with thousands more movies and TV shows. Available on live and on demand. Download the free Pluto TV app on all your favorite devices and start streaming now. Pluto TV. Drop in, watch free.